Good evening. The opinions and statements voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network. Enjoy the shows.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
Now, historic films made in the spring of 1948 and just released show Eniwetok preparing for heavily guarded and still largely secret tests of new atomic weapons. The test's purpose is to measure atomic effects on thousands of different materials, 30,000 tons of them, not, as at Bikini, to prove military effectiveness.
San Francisco police say that 9 persons have been arrested in a narcotics raid on the headquarters of the Grateful Dead, a widely popular singing group. 2 members of the group, Rod McKernan and Robert Weir, and their business manager, Danny Rifkin, have been booked on suspicion of possessing narcotics.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
We got a roll program. Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, strange lights are causing a viral buzz on YouTube. Could we have caught extraterrestrial activity on a recent newscast? Brandon Arroyo investigates.
As the newscast ended, the controversy began back on September 26th. What is that light shining in the back of the dark night sky?
With coverage reaching all the way back to 1948, for over 70 years, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Now, Fate Magazine Radio is carrying on that tradition of setting the standard in paranormal talk radio as we report and discuss some of the most mysterious and perplexing phenomena imaginable in this strange world of ours. Now, here is your host of Fate Magazine Radio, Kat Hobson.
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining me here on Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine. I am Kat Hobson, your host, and I have such a special show for y'all tonight. I hope you enjoy it as much as I know I'm going to. I'm very fortunate to be joined by Janice Carlson. She is an author, and her book is extraordinary. It is Soul Sensing, How to Communicate with Your Dead Loved Ones. She is a medium and a psychic. And I just wanted to share a couple of the praises that are here for Janice's book. And the first is a gentle and loving guide to staying in contact with departed loved ones, both people and pets. Janice Carlson draws on her extreme experience as a medium to show how the dead reassure us with signs of their presence and how we can communicate with them. Soul sensing will help you validate your experiences and develop your own natural ability to reach out to the other side. That quote was by the dear friend of Fate, Rosemary Ellen Guiley. I just can't tell you how much we miss her. I know that Phyllis misses her daily. And I wanted to share also, Janice Carlson was so accurate She zeroed in on family issues that I never even knew existed. When she accessed her accurate information from my deceased parents, it all made sense. She's uncanny. Her reading helped me immensely, highly recommended, and that is by Phyllis, international publisher, Fate Magazine. And I've got to tell you that in my book, there are no higher accolades that anyone could have achieved. And so, Janice, welcome to Fate Mag Radio. Thank you for being here.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Kat.
You know, I'm really honored that you're here. I enjoyed our conversation when we were discussing doing this. And your information is so easy to accept from you. I think that's pretty neat.
Well, thank you.
So I know that we have people already over in the Spreaker chat and not yet in the Fate chat, but we will get there. So I know that you wanted to, or we wanted you to do your 2020 predictions, but would you like to share a little bit about how you did develop your abilities and what kind of made you the person you are?
Well, I explain in the book, Soul Sensing, about how I came to know that I was a medium. I had two parents who died by the time I was 10. My adoptive father and my biological mother. And I felt like they were communicating with me regularly from the other side when I was a child. And but I didn't ever discuss it with other people because it was kind of frowned on back then. It was the 1960s, and we didn't have what I call TV mediums on the air, so people didn't even know what a medium was. I think our only frame of reference was like a gypsy seance type of thing. And so one day in my 30s, I went over to someone's house, a freelance graphics artist who was helping me with some of the novels I was writing for New York publishers, and she was helping me do promo for them and create graphics. And when I walked into her house, I said, I knew the previous owner of this townhouse, and I like how you've redecorated it. And she said, I really like it here, too, but I wish she'd told me it was haunted before she sold it to me. And I was so surprised to hear her say that because I'd been to the place many times and never heard the former owner ever talk about unusual goings-on or anything like a haunting. So, but when I walked into her living room, my eye was caught by this framed picture on the piano of an older woman, and I said, you know, I have the oddest sense that that's who's visiting you here, who, as you say, is haunting you. And she said, yeah, that's my mother. She died 8 years ago in a horseback riding accident. And these messages kept popping into my head, and I kept conveying them to my graphics artist, Jody. And we went on for half an hour or more that way with me just saying what was coming to mind. And I said the word ducks, and she started to cry. And she said, that's what my mother used to call me when I was little. It was the nickname that the family had for me. I haven't heard it in years. And she said they called me that because my first stuffed animal was a duck, and I used to chase the ducks around and out back and stuff. She lived on a farm. And so that's when I started to think there was something up here. And I did not have the frame of reference of like a John Edward or a Sylvia Browne. I just didn't know of those people yet. And I think it was the early 90s. And so I went home, I told my husband about it, and it was a very out-of-body experience for me, and I didn't know if it would ever happen again. But as the years went on, when I was at a funeral or something, and I'd get messages from the deceased loved one, and later maybe approach the family and say, do you want me to tell you what the messages that I'm getting? And people were really good about helping me train that way as a medium. And so I just sort of honed my skills, which I think were sort of from my childhood. But then I was faced with, how do I teach other people to do this if they're inclined to do it, to talk to their loved ones. And the first thing that we tend to do is try to at least acquaint you with the signs that they're visiting you. And that's the first step. And then going on from there to help people get more in tune with what their loved ones are trying to say to them, and to just stay in regular touch with them, which is what I try to do for my clients, certainly, too.
I have a question. When you say that the time that you were with your graphic artist and as she was working, you were talking, that it was kind of an out-of-body experience for you.
Yeah, yes.
Like in the real sense, as in you were channeling, or how did you mean that?
Well, yeah, I guess it was sort of like channeling. It wasn't like anything I'd ever encountered before, and so for that reason, I knew that it was something. I knew it was something paranormal. I knew it was something metaphysical. It didn't seem to be within the laws of science and stuff. So for that reason, I think that's why I had the experience of feeling kind of out of body because of it.
That is so interesting. And that was the first time that it happened? And that to that degree?
To that degree, and for a stranger. I mean, I had never met Jody prior to that day. And so I had no idea why I was able to do it for her. But it occurred to me later that it was because her mother had died in a horseback riding accident, and Jody explained that they didn't get a chance to say goodbye because her mother was out of state when it happened. And I think that her mother really wanted to say goodbye and to have some closure. But it's not just closure that I seek for my clients or, the people that I'm teaching how to do this. It's ongoing communication. I think we continue to communicate with the dead, and they continue to communicate with us. There can be exceptions to that, of course, but, basically that's sort of how it goes, that they continue to want to be in touch with us and vice versa.
Well, I know that that the people that I do communicate with seem to be around often.
Yes.
So, and that seems to have gone on since they moved into whatever comes next.
Right.
And I think that, I have just received your book, and I was up into the wee hours because I was already fascinated. I was reading on Kindle. But it's so much better to have
flattering.
it in hand.
That's flattering that you'd stay up and read essentially what is a how-to book, but it really is a how-to book. But it's also my experiences and other people's experiences, people who were willing to share their experiences with me so that I could put them in the book, yeah.
Well, it's like a who's who of helping you through. And
yes,
it's when you get to your 7 soul senses, I would never have thought of the clairs as being soul senses. So
no, but when you think about hauntings and stuff, you start to realize that, when people report hauntings, they'll often say, "Oh, I smelled the aftershave that my uncle used to wear. Is anybody else smelling that?" And that sort of thing. So, actually, they very much are accessing what you'd say is the clairs, what is otherwise thought of as psychic senses. It's inner senses, certainly. And often we are the only one in the room that smells, say, cigarette smoke or whatever, but usually that's a spirit communicating with you and putting a signature on that communication. The signature being, the scent of a perfume they used to wear, or an aftershave, or if they were a smoker, that's why you're getting that particular smell, so that they can both communicate with you and also identify themselves.
Well, we have a question for you in chat, and it's an interesting one. Because this is a paranormal investigator, and she would like to know what your feelings are about the paranormal equipment used on investigations. Do you think that they may work, or do you think they're silly? Or what is your take on that?
I think anything we can do to communicate is important. If you don't have a medium with you, certainly that equipment can be quite helpful. The only time that I would have an objection with some mode of communication would be something like a Ouija board, simply because it's often in the hands of people who don't know what they're doing and are just asking, will anybody on the other side talk to me? Also, the dead complain about Ouija boards being quite slow for anything but a yes-no question. Having to spell all of that out is tedious at best. And so I've just never thought of the Ouija board as anything more than what its manufacturers call it, and that's a game board.
Well, I agree. I think that's truly the case with that. And I have had people who had negative experiences with them. One of my most memorable cases as an investigator involved one, but it wasn't the board, it was the question, his initial question, which was, is there anything here that would like to communicate with me? Not anyone. Words matter.
They do, and anonymity can be quite dangerous with spirit communication. Now, ghost hunters generally know how to protect themselves before they go into these settings. Yes. They generally know how to clean and seal their aura and this type of thing. Mediums tend to be quite protected. But, you can get yourself into a fix where you're bringing home negative energy from those settings, and it can really be hard to get rid of it.
Well, yes. And this took 2 visits from a really experienced paranormal team, and on the second visit, a leader of another really good paranormal team joined us. So it was somebody that I investigated with as well. So it was. But really
overall,
a strange thing.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
The overall, I'd have to say the equipment we've got today kind of excites me, frankly, as a medium, because we're catching things on camera and on film that we've never been able to catch before. And what it's ultimately doing is expanding our senses of the world, our ability to see and hear. So that equipment is I think it's indispensable, and I'm glad that it's evolving and getting even better. We don't have to deal with slow shutter speeds on cameras anymore. Yes. And because we've got digital cameras, and suddenly now we're getting spirit orbs and all sorts of things that are present, but we've just never been able to see them with the naked human eye before. So that equipment I think it's great.
I like it too. But, there's quite a controversy about orbs. And I'm a photographer, so I recognize condensation and things that create false illusions of, they make dots all over your picture. But I've also seen things that make me go, that's interesting.
Yes.
So, do you feel that orbs are a real interaction?
Yes, I do. Assuming again that you've eliminated the obvious things that it could be, like moisture in the air and dust in certain settings and so forth and so on. But I mentioned this in my book a little later on in my book about how if you zoom in on spirit orbs, very often you can find pictures and numbers and letters that are significant from your deceased loved one. And I tell a story in my book about a boy who he wasn't a boy, he was in his early 20s, who was stabbed to death a few days before Christmas working as a bouncer at a bar here in Minnesota. And his family was taking pictures on Christmas Eve because I told them that's what Greg would want them to do. And they found this spirit orb, opened it up, and it was a picture of the dog that had just died a couple days after Greg's death. And it was as though Greg was saying, I took the dog with me. I took Katie with me because she was elderly, and you were putting her down until after Christmas, and I just took her with me, and I want you to know she's in good hands. And it was a full color picture of this dog turning and looking at the camera as though someone was calling it. I mean, when you start seeing full color stuff in some of these spirit orbs, you start to realize that they are not only the presence of a spirit, but also could be a mode of communication.
That's brilliant. But we are up against our first break. I'm always amazed when that happens. But we will be right back. I hope y'all enjoy this, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Several U.S. presidents are on record talking about the UFO mystery.
Yeah, Presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan both had UFO sightings of their own, but the current presidential campaign might be the first in which UFO disclosure has been championed by a major party candidate.
DIA, CIA, it moves around, is operating a program to train psychic spies to spy and use their powers against Russia. John Ronson writes about this in The Men Who Stare at Goats.
The first known sighting of a ghost took place right after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in the late 1860s during the administration of Ulysses Grant.
Project Paperclip, Clinton releases it all in 1998.
Possibly the unequal cooling of its surface.
I say, do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial.
It's a place where UFO hunters and scientists gather to examine paranormal activity in the region.
Some of the documents, this is bringing Nazi scientists into the United States to work here. So we fought against the Nazis, and it's not, this again is not a revelation. As early as 1947, 1946, we knew some of this, right?
On the paranormal, will we see U.S. President Barack Obama's foreign policy go intergalactic in a quest for gold stolen by aliens? We'll tell you at least how the White House responded to claims the chief executive has been teleporting to Mars. But let's get to today's Capitol account.
UFOs, hauntings, psychic abilities, conspiracy, ESP, cryptozoology. There are many things that remain unexplained in the inexplicable world around us, and we're talking about them here, looking for answers on WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama. The truth is out there.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio. I am Kat Hobson, the voice of Fate, and I am joined by Janice Carlson. And Janice is a medium and psychic and author of Soul Sensing, How to Communicate with Your Dead Loved Ones. And we have been having a great conversation. And someone in chat would like to know if they can ask you questions. I think you didn't want to have personal ones, right? Right? Okay, so I will say that if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat room. And if it's something that she feels will be good for you, I'm assuming, then we'll answer that. And if it's not something that you're comfortable with, then we will let it slide, right?
Right.
Okay. And so Joni in chat said just one. If she feels like it's appropriate to answer Joni, please do go ahead and put it in there. And we're actually going to be focusing on 2020 predictions, but I know the circumstance, and if you would like to put just one in there, if it's something that she feels she can answer for you comfortably for you online, then she will. So we'll see what comes there. And, you know, I was just telling you that the story that you told at break was something that I could really resonate with, because my dog died shortly after my dad, and I had had my dog for 20 years. So I really feel like my dad loved him. He always said he looked like he'd laid up under an old leaky truck because he was spotted, and you know, they both loved outside and wandering and climbing mountains, and so I really feel like my dad came and got Max. And I had a really hard time with that, even though I felt like it was my dad. So can you sometimes, if somebody is having those experiences, help them feel better about them?
Oh, sure, of course.
Is it closure or just understanding?
Well, it's understanding, too. I mean, you know, we as pet owners, and I've had 8 dogs in the course of my marriage that have all gotten old and had to be put down, and you know, that time is the roughest that most of us face, I think. It's certainly one of the very roughest things, is having to face that you're going to have to make the decision to put an animal down. And yet, when you're over on the other side, you know, I had a near-death experience that I told you about the other day, too. And when you're over on the other side and you see how pleasant and healing and wonderful it is, how all of your needs are just met by being there, it's easier for them to just make the move and say this pet needs to come over. It's suffering and it's just time. And I think they can see the picture much more clearly because they're already on the other side. And so I think that's exactly what happened in your case too, is that your dad felt that the most merciful thing to do would be go ahead and bring him over.
Is it unusual for pets to share themselves with you after they cross?
No. And very often in a reading, you know, people will tell me ahead of time, the only piece of information I ask them about is, who is it that you want to talk to on the other side? In part because I don't like the anonymity thing, as I told you. I don't like inviting just anybody in. And in part because it just helps me get a connection. And what I ask them is, what relation is this person to you who's died? Is it your mom? Is it your boyfriend? Your uncle? Who is it? A pet? And that's all I know. I usually don't know anything more, or the names or the cause of death or anything, because all of that stuff is what I call identifying information. And if I know too much of that stuff ahead of time, it's hard for me, even as a medium, to prove to you that I'm talking to who you want me to be talking to for you. So the pets come the way that they come to the door. I mean, everyone who's ever owned a dog knows that very often the dog gets to the door before you do when visitors come over. And that's because it's their job. They guard. And that's kind of how it is on the other side. Very often it's the first person we're going to end up talking to is a pet, even though you may not have asked to talk to this person or to this pet. They are the first ones that show up to the, shall we call it the mic, I guess, so that you can start getting messages.
Cool. I like that. I interact with my animals better than most humans.
Sure.
So that's a good thing. Okay.
Yeah.
We have 2 more questions, and then I want to get to your predictions because I'm really excited about that.
Yes, I'm excited about 2020. It's going to be a good year.
I am too. It just feels good.
Mm-hmm.
the first question, and I think that I have Joni's answer, but I'm going to step aside for the person that does this best. But Joni said that her son, who crossed, passed on to someone, a psychic at his memorial, that he wanted for her to have these certain rosary beads, which is the last thing she would want because she's not Catholic. What's with the rosary beads? And then she said, by the way, his wife gave her the beads, so she has them. But she wasn't sure what was up with him wanting her to have them.
I think that prayer is a form of communication, and that may be just simply the message, is that this is one of the tools for communication with the other side and with heaven, more specifically. So in a way, those beads may help open a door for communication between her and her son, if she hasn't already done that, opened some portals to that.
Well, I think that's great. I was going to say protection, but I think that the communication side of that would be much more important to her.
Okay.
So that's very neat. And we have this other question, and then we're going to move on because we could be here with questions forever, and we'll still take some. I'm not saying don't put your questions in there. Please do. But this is a great one. And she says, well, talking about the other side, why do you believe some spirits don't know they have died, or do you believe they are stuck here and can't move on to a good place?
I think it's the second of the two, if I had to pick from one of those two. I think dying is like a vortex. Having myself had a near-death experience in November of last year, I was given an overdose of anesthetic during a colonoscopy and barely came out of that and ended up in an ambulance going to a hospital. In any case, what I saw, I think, was the outskirts of heaven. And it just, I guess I'm probably wandering too much. What do you think is the crux of her question?
I think she just wants to know why there are spirits here that
stay here. Yeah.
Yeah, that can be interacted with.
And I think that the answer is kind of complex also. When we die, most physicists would tell you, quantum physicists certainly, that we become subatomic matter. And subatomic matter can be in two places at once. It's possible that a spirit can have crossed over and still be haunting a place, from what I've read about, physics and quantum physics and so forth. So, that might be what you're running into is residual energy. Often it's somebody who owned the place in question, the house in question, or the place of business. They have a very, very big emotional and spiritual investment in the place. Or you're picking up on some old energy from a trauma that may have happened there. I'm not convinced it's 100% one person's soul that's doing it. It could again be more fractal than that, more about residual energy in a spot.
Well, that's a great answer. With the new quantum entanglements theory that appears to be being proven out, even alive or past, we can ostensibly experience situations, be in the same situation, but experience it quite differently from people in it with us.
Right.
So I think that's one of the most fascinating fields of study on the planet at this point.
Isn't it? Yeah.
But I'm always fascinated, and the people that are actually building quantum machines, quantum computers, I can't fathom how they even wrap their minds around that. There's a young man out of Canada who is like in the top 20, under 20 in Canada at one point, and he is a quantum physicist, and I follow him on Twitter just because his work is so astounding. And
yes,
if anybody ever wants to follow him, his name is Deep Prasad, and he's worth looking at. He's brilliant. And I'm trying desperately to get him on my show.
And if they can, yes, and if they've also got the gift of putting it into everyday English so people can understand it. I know when I wrote Chapter 3 of Soul Sensing, Why Soul Sensing Works, it's very much about what do we become when we die. Mm-hmm. Because to me, the more interesting question was not just where we go when we die, but what do we become? Why are ghosts able to walk through solid matter like walls? Why does somebody die in a family and two different family members in different places both say they saw them simultaneously visiting their home? You know what I mean? Like they were literally in two different places at once.
Yes.
And so that was why I asked that question. What do we become when we die? Where does that energy go? Because anybody who's known and loved somebody, especially somebody with a big personality, just cannot grasp the fact that they're gone. I mean, gone, like literally,
finished,
dispensed of, like made to disappear, and their energy is just dissipated, and they've perished, so to speak. It's hard for us to wrap our head around that because energy doesn't do that. It changes form.
Exactly. It just transitions.
Yes.
And that fascinates me too because I have heard people in my family say that they saw someone, like you said, two different people, two different places.
Right.
And it was just, I was like, well, that's cool. I don't have any idea how that happened. And then I started studying this a bit, and it's a great concept. You know, we don't know. We think that we have learned so much, but there's so much to learn.
Exactly.
You know, we never really...
And it is a form of science. I mean, you know, I'll even talk to very left-brain scientist types, and they can be very difficult to do a medium reading for because they're in their critical left lobe the whole time. And so it's very hard to get them to even accept this. But the truth is it's another kind of science.
Yes.
And a legitimate kind of science. I mean, we wouldn't have a space program if we weren't open to other kinds of science besides physical science. Because when you go into space, you have to deal with time-space issues. And things that don't even seem to make sense, like black holes and so forth, you know, and all that.
And stars imploding and exploding.
Yes.
And yeah, my favorite star, it's my favorite star because I can always find it. So I'm going to be crushed if I'm still around when it does go supernova. But Betelgeuse is going supernova, they think. And I am going to miss that star. I know that sounds crazy, but
I've never heard anybody say it. It's certainly thought provoking,
right? So
yeah,
it's just a cool.
But that tells me that you're doing what you need to do as someone studying the paranormal. You are studying possibility of other dimensions and time and space, and those are the things you need to learn about.
It is. They are.
Yeah.
And that particular side of science is just amazing to me because I have watched things that nothing ever manifested, but as it was coming, and it was coming toward me, I felt it, and I actually felt animosity, but it may have just been frustration, but it looked like a heat shimmer, like on the asphalt.
Yeah.
Right? And there were two coming down the hall of a hotel straight toward me. And I thought, well, that's not a ghost. You know?
Right.
That's not what they're supposed to look like. And so it was disconcerting to me, and I was a lot younger then. I was actually at a football game in Auburn, Alabama, and had stopped at an old haunted inn with my mom on the way home. So the place was known to be haunted. Those were supposed to be ghosts, and they didn't appear like a ghost at all. It was dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
So,
mm-hmm.
and that's when I just decided that's pretty darn cool.
Yes, it's so much more complex than, this answer or that answer, that you can be looking at a variety of different phenomena all at once.
Well, yeah. And I mean, it could have been just where a portal to another dimension opened, and these were people that were having a frustrating discussion together because it looked like two. So,
right.
It might not have been frustration with me at all or anger with me at all. It just was, I happened into their space, or they happened into mine.
Right.
It was neat.
Exactly.
And thanks for validating that. Because
yeah. People think they're losing their minds, especially when someone has lost a loved one. They'll think, I can't tell anybody that happened. They'll think I'm crazy. I can't tell anybody that I'm talking to my dead husband. But in fact, that's precisely what you should be doing. Maybe not in front of others, but certainly communicating with them somehow and encouraging them to bring through signs. Because, I always use this example. If you went to visit a friend and every time you knocked on their door, they never answered, you would quit knocking on their door. And it's the same with the deceased. If they don't get any kind of acknowledgement from you about the signs and the messages that they bring through, then they will quit trying, because it takes a lot of energy to do it.
I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I try to always acknowledge when I feel that something's around.
Right.
So, and before
right.
we go to our next break, Sherry would like to know if you're ever at a grocery store and a spirit reaches out and asks you to say something to the cashier or anything of that nature. Do you ever just have someone try to reach out through you?
I will if my husband is not with me. I will do it if I'm alone sometimes. But I don't do it when my husband's there because it embarrasses him.
I understand.
And also, when you're getting messages for someone, you kind of need to ask their permission before you bring anything through. It's a little bit like opening someone's mail. It's really none of your business. And unless I really feel like I can help in some way, I'm not going to put myself or my husband in that position of being embarrassed by it, I guess. So that would make me a bad TV medium, because I'm not going to just foist this on people. I feel like they need to come to me with a desire to talk to that loved one. If they're not motivated to do that, then the session usually doesn't go very well either.
Well, obviously.
Right.
And before we go to break, I just wanted to let you know that Joni said that her family continuously talks to Kevin out loud.
Good.
And he is communicating with them too, which I find not the least bit surprising.
Some spirits can read your mind and some can't. My husband and I, after 40-odd years of marriage, I'm able to psychically kind of tap into him and vice versa. So in other words, I'll know when he's bringing home Chinese food or something, even though he never said he was going to do that. Yes. But if you didn't have that kind of psychic connection when they were alive, then odds are pretty good you're going to have to talk out loud to your loved one.
Right.
Your dead loved one. Yeah.
And that being said, we are going to our next break, and we'll be back on the flip side, and we're going to start talking predictions. 2020 is already rocking, so y'all hang loose with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
And we are back. I am Kat here. I'm your host of Fate Mag Radio, the voice of fate, as it were, with my guest, Janice Carlson. And it is time. I do see the question. We're going to pick it up toward the end. It is time for those 2020 predictions to start. And I'm curious. I don't know what you need me to do to help. If you just are going to share what you know. Maybe you want to explain why we're doing the Chinese New Year.
Yeah.
And then we'll just take it from there. And I will go with the flow.
Well, I do a regular newsletter for my clients, and I got into trying to do a predictions newsletter every January or February, in there somewhere. And that's when I started trying to figure out where I didn't want to just do psychic predictions alone. I wanted to take a look at sort of the cosmic currents. And one of the ways that I do that is to take a look at the Chinese New Year and what their animal for the year is. And this year, I also use some what we'd call Western astrology as well in making some of my predictions. But this year is the year of the metal rat. And that sounds awful, but think for a minute about the characteristics of a rat. I think most of us are going to find that we are, like the rat, more energetic this year and more optimistic and a little bit more alert for opportunities and also more aware of when to get out of the way when something is threatening us. And so those are the aspects of the rat that will be positive for us in the coming year. I personally, I just breathed a sigh of relief when 2019 was over. At midnight, I just could feel so optimistic about the coming year, and also, like most of us are going to be, that we're going to find confidence that we didn't have last year, and we're going to find that we feel like we're more in the driver's seats of our lives rather than feeling like someone's throwing lightning bolts down on us from the sky. 2019 had that quality for a lot of people of just kind of being just a lousy year. Yeah. And lousy in the sense that so many things that went wrong were not things most of us could control very much. And so 2020 is going to make most of us feel much more empowered to take the wheel, to know when to put on the brakes with people and things that are rushing us. And when to just take the time to make a considered decision rather than being rushed into making decisions. And also the rat is quite sturdy, and the metal aspect of this year will cause most of us to have self-confidence and intuitiveness to know when those in power are rushing us and not telling us the truth or leading us down the wrong path. So again, you're going to have better vision, probably maybe not 20/20 vision, but pretty good vision, and be able to, like I say, look what rats can do. I mean, they can sense a sinking ship, and they have the sense to get off of it and save themselves. And the metal aspect again is a Chinese thing. They use elements like so many other groups do, like the Celts and so forth. With the element of metal is an earth element, and water, fire, air, all of those things. So you'll see that the animal for the year is also accompanied by one of those elements generally. So this is, because it's the year of the metal rat, we have a year that the structures in the cities, of our cities, will be safer from natural disasters, but the water element may cause flooding and more ocean-related storms and catastrophes. And then I'm seeing that it'll be a better year for tourism, for travel, for the restaurant and entertainment business. They're all favored to be particularly profitable in 2020, as will finance and investments, the investment field. You know, as everyone knows, the stock market did very well in 2019. It was the year of the pig, and so it doesn't surprise me that if you think of the year of the pig as the piggy bank, many of us earned enough in the stock market to put a fair amount away for retirement and that kind of thing. A lot of wealth building in 2019. 2020 is looking like it'll maintain that, but I do see the stock market taking probably a dip by the end of 2020. You know, it's an election year, so we're going to see it stay pretty buoyant for a while. And certainly I'm not talking about any kind of bubble and burst kind of thing like we had in 2008 when I say that.
Oh, goodness, from your mouth to God's ears.
Yeah, exactly. The Chinese metal rat does not care for drama queens or kings, for that matter. So they tend to jump. You'd be more likely to jump forward to make actual progress with things. We're just going to see the population in general wanting to do that, to get out of political quagmires and into more change that's socially required, whether it's infrastructure, building the infrastructure in the U.S. or whatever it might be, alternative energy sources. But you are going to see with the rat an unwillingness to keep delaying things and keep getting caught in quicksand. And along with that, you will see U.S. citizens begin to demand that people that are obstructing legislation, obstructing beneficial projects, that they probably should go, you know. And so you're apt to see people like that being voted out in the next 24 months. And going hand in hand with that is this thrust towards rehumanizing both sides of the political spectrum, rehumanizing instead of demonizing, so that people can actually talk across the aisle to each other again and work in cooperation. That again would be very typical for the year of the rat. Shall I keep going with these predictions, or did you want to ask some questions, Kat?
Well, I wanted to ask about that in particular because, you know, it has been so long since there was any, and I mean, I'm apolitical. I'm a political science major. I love politics. I love watching it. I love studying it. I do not like the politics that we have as a nation right now because it's ridiculous. It's a bunch of kindergartners from both sides.
Right.
I mean, period. Either you act like a grown-up or you go home, as you were saying. If they don't start communicating and doing what they're paid to do, they're going to go home.
Right.
But, you know...
It's certainly obstructionism at its best or at its worst. We can,
at its worst.
Agree. Yeah.
And, you know, I'm curious about this aspect because we keep hearing the words. But when I was in Gettysburg out on the battlefield last year, this was my second time. It was not my first time to go. The first time I was shocked by by the resoluteness that I felt. I expected fear and terror, and all I got was a strong sense of resolution. We have to take care of this. We have to do our job.
Yes.
This is why we're
Yes.
here. Well, last summer when I was there, it was angst. Almost everywhere I went on that battlefield, and they're everywhere there. I don't know if you've been, but they're everywhere.
I have, yeah.
Well, it's overwhelming if you're not used to that. Okay, because everything in me just goes, woo! But it was, you cannot let this happen again. We have been here and done that. Do not let this happen again.
Well, yes, and it ends horribly. You know, they're the ones that could testify to that.
And they were.
Yep.
They were adamant. And I mean, like, there wasn't any place in the whole town to get away from it except my hotel room. And I wasn't staying in there. But it was like a drum beat. Never again, don't let this happen, you know. So I felt like I was supposed to go on a personal crusade or something relevant to that, and I wasn't very comfortable doing that. But that message needed to be shared, and I have here and there. Is that kind of what you're describing, in that, you know, these things are going to start to draw down somewhat? Like, people aren't going to be beaten in the street for their clothing or because they look funny from somebody else. I mean, people are so judgmental from every direction that nobody is safe.
Right. Sometimes the most blessed thing you can hear from someone is, I'm purple. I'm not really red. I'm not really blue. I'm purple. So I'm caught in the middle of this. And for that reason, I think that it's a healing trend, but it's also very typical of the very intelligent rat to say, look, I guess we'll end up eating each other if we don't get this problem resolved. So I'd have to say that it's more of a peacekeeping thing, but it's certainly within the country itself.
Okay.
The name calling, the demonizing, it just is not doing anything except tearing us apart.
So do you feel that this is the particular drawback, the calming that you were describing?
Yeah.
Is that this is
and
going
it's
to
the
start
people.
finding a way?
It's the people that kind of rise above it, is how I'm seeing it. They rise above it and expect better.
I think so, too. I think that's already happening.
I do, too.
Because especially in this since Christmas, really, you hear more and more people say, do your job. We pay you to do a job. You make a freaking ton of money to do a job.
Right.
Everybody needs to be working as a unit. And
yes,
I think
and it can be done.
It can be. Those are all
and
intelligent people. They're not idiots.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody there is intelligent. And they should have communication skills, because they can glad hand everybody to be elected to be there to make their $500,000 a year plus benefits.
Right.
And so do your freaking job.
Exactly. Exactly. And, it's for many.
That's not any particular person. I'm Switzerland.
No.
Yeah,
I understand. You're purple. You're trying to be purple here, which is a good thing, because it keeps the country sewn together instead of tearing it apart. And I'm very purple myself. And there are times when you're not sure where you fit, because you're not on either really extreme end of things. So, you're going to see people say, come on, let's at least get an infrastructure bill out of this, for heaven's sake. Bridges are falling down, and that kind of thing. And you're going to have to quit acting.
Go where it needs to be.
Yeah, quit acting like 3-year-olds and get this done. If I wanted to watch kids fight, I'd go to a playground, Also, it was interesting because in the, I suppose it was the spring of 2019, already I had gotten a prediction. I was wondering who the Democratic presidential candidate would be. And I got the letter B, and it appeared on my dresser. Oddly enough, it was just the letter B on my dresser kind of stained into the wood, and it was just bizarre. And so the feeling I got was that the letter B will either be in the first name or the last name of the candidate on the Democratic side. I also got a sense that we might see a vice presidential candidate on the Democratic side who's a woman. That was the other really strong thing that I saw earlier this year. Overall, though, we're going to see some wonderful breakthroughs in medicine, in the field of regenerative medicine, such as the working with stem cells. It'll start to be done in conjunction with 3D generated body parts, and stem cells alone cannot always replace a hip or a knee, obviously. But when they're put on a scaffold, 3D generated parts and things, that may be the breakthrough that we're looking for, so that replacements, hip and knee kind of replacements, the common ones, will become a thing of the past maybe as soon as 10 years from now. Maybe we'll see it even in the coming decade, which is very good news for a lot of people.
Well, that's about when I should probably need one.
Yeah, yeah, and having nearly died from an overdose of anesthetic, surgery is not always everybody's first choice.
No, it's
either.
not.
And it shouldn't be. There are other things. Along with that, I think will be a couple awarenesses that people need to have about their health in general. One is that there's a reason why they have you go through physical therapy when you have a knee or a hip replaced. And that's to build up the muscles around that joint so that you don't have as much trouble using that joint. It doesn't do any good to replace the joint if you're not going to do the physical therapy. And they know that, and they tell you that. And so the thing is, though, a lot of that can be done before a procedure needs to be done, so that you can hold that joint into place just doing hip and knee types of exercises that you can learn from, the internet. There is some of that on there. Also, your chiropractor or a physical therapist can do some of those things to prevent you from having to go under the knife. So we're going to see a change of heart about some of this replacement business, and that'll be some of the driving forces. We also are going to see that doctors are going to recommend more fasting to people.
Oh, yes.
And that is a very, very it's a very healthy choice. Some doctors are already saying out of every 24 hours, make sure that you fast for 14 of them.
Yes,
now, that sounds...
I've got to interrupt you because it's time for a break. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
But we will be right back, and this is getting good, people. I know y'all are writing these down. I'll catch you on the flip side.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. Forces loyal to a Libyan militia commander have shut off production at several major oil fields, while global leaders met in Berlin to pave the way for an end to the Libyan conflict. NPR's Rob Schmitz has more.
For months, the two sides involved in a civil war in Libya have received support from foreign countries. The militia led by 76-year-old Khalifa Hifter that has laid siege to Tripoli has been backed by Russia, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt, while Turkey has helped defend the United Nations-backed government in Tripoli. All of these parties agreed today to immediately cease their military aid so that the two sides in the war can begin talks for a ceasefire. Hifter has also agreed to send 5 representatives to meet 5 counterparts from the opposing side in the next few weeks to begin a ceasefire agreement. Today's agreement, brokered by German Chancellor Angela Merkel, will need to pass a vote in the UN Security Council for approval. Rob Schmitz, NPR News, Berlin.
Democratic presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders is declining to elaborate on a dispute with fellow candidate Elizabeth Warren, which kicked off a broader debate this week over gender and electability. But as Casey McDermott of member station NHPR reports, in an interview with New Hampshire Public Radio, Sanders weighed in on the obstacles facing female candidates.
Asked whether women have a harder time running for president, Sanders said yes, but that many candidates have obstacles that could be viewed as liabilities. At 78, he said he faces doubts about his age.
Nobody is perfect. There ain't no perfect candidate out there. And all of us have got to do the best. What does that candidate stand for? What is the life record of that campaign?
Sanders declined to elaborate on what was said during the disputed conversation about the dynamics of the 2020 election that has been at the center of his recent quarrel with Warren. But Sanders said he firmly believes a woman can be president. And if a woman is the nominee in 2020, he will do everything he can to get her elected. For NPR News, I'm Casey McDermott in Concord.
China on Monday reported 139 new cases of pneumonia over the weekend, caused by the outbreak of a new coronavirus strain that medical experts are still struggling to understand. NPR's Amy Cheng has more.
Public health officials in the city of Wuhan confirmed that the additional 17 pneumonia cases are caused by a new strain of coronavirus. This novel variation of the virus is now responsible for a total of 62 cases in China, including 2 fatalities. Even though Wuhan is the only city with confirmed cases, many in China are concerned that the disease may spread as hundreds of millions of people travel home or abroad for the upcoming Chinese New Year. Officials say they're taking the necessary precautions to prevent the virus from spreading. But neighboring countries like Japan and Thailand, and even the United States, have set up screening measures for passengers coming from China. Amy Chang, NPR News, Beijing.
And you're listening to NPR News from Washington. One half of the Super Bowl 54 teams is set. The Kansas City Chiefs beat the Tennessee Titans 35-24 this evening to win the AFC title and a chance to play either the Green Bay Packers or the San Francisco 49ers in Miami in 2 weeks. Now, that game just got underway for the NFC crown. Score at last check, 7-0 49ers in the first. SpaceX is one step closer to transporting humans to the International Space Station. It's completed its last big test of its crew capsule, launching it from Cape Canaveral this morning with 2 mannequins on board. The test was to make sure that people could be safely recovered. SpaceX plans to launch astronauts in about 2 months. Well, it's the middle of awards season, and the Screen Actors Guild Awards are getting underway in Los Angeles. As NPR's Andrew Limbong reports, the Korean class warfare thriller Parasite has become the second foreign language movie ever up for the night's biggest award.
The Actors Union nominated the cast of Parasite for outstanding performance by a cast in a motion picture.
이 어른들의 관점으로는 이해를 못하는 거지.
Up against the casts of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Jojo Rabbit, The Irishman, and Bombshell.
Will other women come forward? Yes, they will.
Some actors who got overlooked at the Oscars are up for a SAG award on Sunday, including Jamie Foxx from Just Mercy, Lupita Nyong'o from Us, and Jennifer Lopez from Hustlers.
I guess I'm just a people person.
The SAG Awards cover TV, too, with Amazon's The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel up for the most awards. Just FYI, NPR journalists are a part of the SAG-AFTRA union and can vote in the awards. Andrew Limbong, NPR News.
And I'm Janine Herbst, NPR News in Washington.
Welcome back to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 5 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Kat Hobson. I'm your host, and that would make me the voice of Fate, the online voice of Fate magazine. You know what? If your subscription is expired or close to it, you need to get that redone because Phyllis has a new edition heading your way. I'm so excited about that. And tonight I am joined by Janice Carlson. Janice is the author of Soul Sensing, How to Communicate with Your Dead Loved Ones. She is also a medium as well as a psychic. I am so enjoying our conversation. We had some questions and answers and talking about some stuff at the beginning of the show. Don't worry if you missed it. Our archives are on iHeart, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher. They're all across the internet. We're kind of like, that card that's where you want to be. So feel free just to find us. I will also post an archive link in our chat and the Fate Mag Radio page as well. So Janice, thank you for being here. We had left it kind of with our discussion on politics and such, and now we had moved on to the stem cell with 3D, and then we had moved on to the fasting. And
Right.
I am really, and I have been slack on my water intake, so the fasting is really, you have to do that. You have to drink.
Right. Oh, yes, of course. I mean, certainly it's not something you want to do without using good common sense and stuff. But
Absolutely.
we're talking more about not eating after a certain hour in the evening. We're not talking about necessarily any kind of like what you'd think of in the olden days as a fast, like going 3 days and drinking nothing but vinegar and water or something. I mean, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about just making sure that certain hours of the evening, and into the night are times when you're not eating, when you're giving your stomach and in effect your digestive system and your immune system a rest. And so that's why you'd see doctors talking about having maybe a 14-hour period out of every 24 where you're not asking your body to keep digesting food, so that it can take a break. When it's taking a break, it can do other kinds of cleanup and repair work. I always wondered when I was a teenager, every time I'd go on a, quote, diet, my skin would break out. And I was informed later by my biology teacher that my body was cleaning itself out because you're not spending as much energy and time digesting food.
I had not made that correlation.
So that's why you're probably going to see more doctors. I'm hearing it certainly up in Minnesota from doctors, but you're going to hear them saying this. They're not talking about days-long fasting. They're talking about cutting off when you eat at a certain hour in the evening and then not eating again until breakfast, that kind of thing. The downside of the year of the rat, even though it's overall going to be quite a good year for most people, I'm not saying it won't have its trials and tribulations, but we're going to have more energy and optimism driving us through it, which makes any year easier. But because the rat is often the spreader of disease, we also have to be aware that 2020 may be a year when we're more prone in the U.S. or even globally to epidemics, and also maybe an unusually deadly flu season. But that was really the only down thing that I was seeing about the year of the rat. We also are going to see more immune system stimulating methods of medicine that will become more mainstream in 2020, so that maybe when you go to the doctor and you have cancer, God forbid, they can recommend more to you than just chemotherapy. And that's something that a lot of consumers would like to see happen. The rat is empowered, that, we're more likely to be empowered and to say, I'm not just a patient with my doctor, I'm also a customer. And I have the right to ask for some alternative recommendations.
That's actually a very valid point. And what you said about options beyond chemo or besides chemo.
Right.
I happen to live in an area where we have a comprehensive cancer center. Back in the day, we were one of 5. Now they're everywhere. But there are so many dietary things that you can do to support your chemo if that's what you have to have, to support your immune system, to help you fight if you opt out of chemo. There are just so many things that are alternatives. And I always laugh because when I worked for the American Cancer Society in the early 1980s, all of the things that they as a organization kind of mocked are now standard practices in cancer care.
Right.
And they had a name for it that fails me now, but it was just like, this is crazy to be given this such a hard time. You should at least be looking at it. And there you go. There are different options. You just have to research and communicate and work within the protocols, really.
Yeah. And sadly, we do have a for-profit medical system, and it's part of the stock market and so forth. And so obviously they're going to push the things they have on hand. You know, if chemotherapy has been their standard, then they're going to push that. And sometimes it's not the best choice.
Absolutely.
And so people do need to read more about what they've been diagnosed with and get more familiar with alternatives and ask about those alternatives because, you know, the medical world may choose to do what's most profitable for them.
Seem to.
Yep, and what may not be the best choice for you. I'm not saying it happens with every doctor because it doesn't. But, you know, we all choose convenience and that sort of thing. And and again, on the other hand, it may be more convenient for the doctor and not so convenient for you. And those are things that people have explored in other areas like childbirth and things like that. But we certainly need to look at it with other issues and not just take the first thing offered, but consider all of the choices.
Well, you know, I had an illness relevant. Well, it's like an ongoing thing called Hashimoto's. And that came about because I was uninformed when I was younger and had Graves' disease. So I allowed my thyroid to be treated in a fashion that, with more education about it, I would not have chosen. And as a result, I have autoimmune things going on.
Right.
From the lack of thyroid function. So you just have to ask questions and don't just placidly go there.
Well, we have that information highway out there now. It's there. It's part of almost everybody's life, you know. And at least you can read about your situation and not just take the first diagnosis maybe that always comes with, you know, with it or whatever. Dig in deeper and be able to ask questions and say, is it possible it's this or it's possible it's that? I mean, with something like Hashimoto's, wasn't it preceded by something like celiac disease?
No, but it has truly affected. I had a stomach virus that damaged my intestines. And that is why I have trouble with gluten. Mm-hmm. So, and I am not as careful as I should be, but I am cautious to not overcome my system with wheats and grains and such as that. And I don't trust what's on those, what is used to grow them. So, you know,
But see, that you're coming from a place of knowledge and having researched it yourself. None of us can expect your doctor to know every aspect of your particular illness or malady. No. There's just no way they can do that. They're not walking, talking computers. Nor do they know they don't know every side effect of every drug they prescribe because, you know, it can be the list can be as long as your arm. That's on you. And the year of the rat is one of those years where people are going to start saying, wait a minute, this is my disease, my malady, my problem, and I need to study it and learn as much about it as I possibly can so that when I do get a chance to meet with a doctor, I ask the right questions.
Well, I went searching for a holistic practitioner who happens to be an MD, and that was because I wanted to change my thyroid meds to something natural, and no one does that. You know, I learned that Synthroid is the drug of choice for hypothyroidism based on a study that included 67 people in the 40s. And that drug is still the drug of choice because nobody has challenged that. So I found a natural choice, and I couldn't find a doctor to give it to me, so I called the manufacturer and said, who is prescribing this in my area?
Right.
And I found my doctor.
There you go. And that's a rare combination, what you found there.
Yep.
It's rare to have, you know, someone who knows anything about the holistic end of it, along with having a medical degree.
She's an herbalist,
unusual.
too. So she's
well,
the full Monty.
That's a pretty good deal if you could find someone who's that conversant with that many options to offer. That's pretty amazing.
I'm very fortunate, but it took a lot to find her. And when I did, she gave me a hug and said, I'm so glad you found me.
Yes. Yeah. it's wonderful when you can have that kind of rapport with a doctor. Absolutely. And then I did want to say one other thing that I noticed about the year is, again, from just Western traditional astrology, and that is the autumn Mercury retrograde. Anybody that's familiar with, horoscopes that you read in the newspaper or buying an annual horoscope for your sign or whatever, your sun sign, knows that those Mercury retrogrades are a pain in the neck, and they can strike.
Is that supposed to be universal?
I guess. I don't know. I know in the Western world we're very aware of them.
Right. Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah. But, what's interesting with this one, and again, some of these retrogrades affect communications. Some of them affect, like electronic devices, Some of them affect travel and all sorts of different things. But this one, it's interesting because thank God it doesn't land right on our election. It ends like on November 2nd or 3rd, but it precedes it. It starts on October 14th. So what I'm seeing from that, what I'm taking away from that is that we will be fairly clear, very clear on our presidential election this time around. But there may be some dispute about the period leading up to it, as in foreign interference, gerrymandering, voter fraud. I mean, the numbers will be clear, but, there could be some hubbub about the period preceding the election.
I think that's already in place, that plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
They've already got that laid out.
Yeah, they kind of do. But nevertheless, I do see that the will of the majority of American people, not just its landowners, but the majority of the American people will be the determining factor in the outcome of this election. Good. Which I find comforting because I like to go with what the majority thinks we should do.
Well, that's the way it's supposed to work. But then again, we have that electoral college because they didn't think that any farmers would be considered. There's just so much to that. But
there is.
But that's the way it's supposed to work. So
that the majority rules. Yeah. So I think the numbers will.
So we're a republic. So.
Yeah, that's true too. But I think the outcome will be clear, but there will be this issue about what preceded it, the period that preceded it. So that's what was that?
Doesn't that concern you?
That
there's
little.
Going to be the build-up.
Well, yes, certainly. I mean, and it's kind of unavoidable. These Mercury retrogrades, like I say, are a real pain. But I was glad to see it sort of preceding the election rather than right directly on top of it, Was there anything you wanted to ask about, Kat, with the coming year that I might be able to talk about?
But first I wanted to say I was not trying to correct you. I just, in a democracy, it is always the majority rules. Mm-hmm. Versus with the way they set our republic up, it's not always the majority of the numbers because of the population centers. And that's the only thing I was pointing out. I was not trying to be argumentative with you about
no.
That's
a very good.
That way.
No, that's a very good point, and I think that most people don't understand the Electoral College. Yeah. So that's a very good differentiation to make.
Well, poli-sci major, boring person. So.
No, it's probably coming in much more handy than you thought it would. Actually.
Well, certainly I took it because my university didn't have a pre-law curriculum, and I wanted to be an attorney.
Okay.
So, well, I am curious because, I did have from the end of October of 2018 through all of 2019. I still have a little struggle with it now, but I can feel that I have altered, so that's fantastic, and because I've been fighting the general malaise that goes with stuff. So, you know, is that more of this being flexible, not quite rigid like the metal versus a concrete or stone, and also being at the end of a period where things are starting to shift?
Well, you know, we have to remember that 2019 was the end of a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always interesting to go back to the year, like the preceding decade would have started with, you know, like with 2009, and just kind of look at what was happening at that time and how that particular decade grew out of that situation. And so it's the same with 2019. Part of that sigh of relief that many of us felt going into 2020 and switching out of 2019, it was just getting rid of a decade as well. A decade that was, you know, certainly not cataclysmic, but it had its problems, you know, as all decades do. But when we were coming out of 2009, for instance, we had an ongoing financial crisis and recession that we weren't sure we were going to find our way out of. Let's see, Russia had just shut off all gas supplies to Europe. Yeah. The global swine flu pandemic was declared by the World Health Organization. So some of the things we thought would be big and horrible and scary kind of died out, and other things became bigger or bigger problems or bigger opportunities too. When you look at 2019, an awful lot of stuff came down in that year that made people uncomfortable. And, you know, but that doesn't mean they'll necessarily be the items that see us through the whole, that like haunt us or dog us all the way through the coming decade. Some of it will probably die out and not be as serious as it seems.
Well, I found that particularly with the particulars that you mentioned, most of those that caused terror in the hearts of men were media hype.
Yeah.
So, and I think that, you know, we had discussed earlier that we see that today. So maybe that will get reined in somewhat too. That would be beautiful.
And a part of it too is people's responses to it. We're already aware of what general like media like Facebook and stuff can do. Mm-hmm. The kind of chaos that it can cause, the inability of most of us to know where this news is coming from. We're already following the example of the year of the rat because most of us will question now what we read on Facebook or what we read in a tweet, whereas maybe we weren't doing that much questioning a few years back.
I agree. And I think that one of the benefits coming from all of the, you know, Russia that we've read is that we do pay attention. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, you can't have somebody saying that there's interference and do nothing. So you have to source it and figure it out and make sure they can't.
Yeah, what is the nature of the interference? Is it just to sway people's opinions, or is it hands-on stuff going on at the polls?
Exactly.
That's much more dangerous, and we certainly won't be the first country that's been the victim of that either.
No, and we have seen that in the past, but people did not question it. You know, I know that I've lived in several states and voted in several states, and I always had to have an ID. And I didn't realize that in Alabama. So I went when my driver's license had expired, and I had to go get my driver's license to go back and get my vote done. So that was an interesting afternoon. So
yeah, I think you're right. I know here in Minnesota, I think they do ask for your, you know, driver's license or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, even though you're registered. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And, you know, they also, if you don't have your voter ID card, you have to have another form of ID. And they besides just your driver's license to prove residency.
Right.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
people are slick about that. That's when I started first noticing that happened. I didn't, when it started, I was young and I didn't really question anything. I just showed whatever they asked me for. But,
Right.
And so that's terrific. I wanted to ask also with the way that people respond to different climate type things, and the fear that people have for our environment. Is this going to be a year where things are more able to come into alignment as far as devising methods, reducing some things, just, being more in tune with taking care of our environment?
Yes. The impetus for that will occur in this year, but you'll see more action taken in 2021.
Okay. I hate to think what that impetus could be. We've had several already.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little scary. That's a lot scary.
Yeah.
And I know that...
I think, though, that part of it is just these devastating fires. They're just getting, when you look at that fire, in Australia, and I talk about it in the present tense because it's going to be weeks or months to get that to extinguish. And it looks like it's on the edges of that country.
People were lighting
do you know
them.
what?
I mean,
yeah.
They had 100 and I don't remember. The last I heard, I thought was 148 people who had been arrested for setting those fires.
Yeah.
Who does that?
Yeah. Well, people who don't understand that the prevailing drought and the prevailing winds and the heat and so forth that they're having in what's summer down there, and it's winter here, but
right.
They just don't understand that it's not just a recommendation that you don't build campfires right now. It's the law, and so there are a lot of dumb people not paying attention to the prevailing conditions, and then you end up with this kind of thing, and it's really on the out. It's circling the whole country. That's what I find alarming.
Yes, I also found it alarming that the majority of Aboriginal worship areas, sacred areas, are in the interior. So I thought that was an interesting thing to note too. Those were protected somehow.
Yes. Yeah. But what if they've said that almost 1 billion animals have died?
That's that's what all the memes were saying. It's going to be tragic if that number is accurate.
Right.
And if we lost species.
Right.
Full species.
Exactly. So I also felt when I was doing my predictions that some of the things that Australia does now to repair and heal from this, including saving some species they thought they'd lost, will teach the rest of us how to. They will be in their own way creating some prototypes for what to do in the future.
What a tragic way to learn.
It's like I say, it's a stupid way to learn, but it's enough to hit it home for most people. Just as when that oil spill occurred in the Gulf, there were species that had to be removed and placed elsewhere in order for them to survive. The other side of Florida and so forth and so on, just in order for them to survive. And I don't know how many times we need to really be brought to the brink before we understand the seriousness of this.
Well, I am a Gulf Coast girl. I have a home on the Alabama Gulf Coast, and I I was watching the fishermen. It looked like landfall, right? And it was all the fishing boats end to end pulling boom, which is the thing to block the oil coming in. And they were from horizon to horizon. You could see them. It was night. And they were fighting with everything they had, every resource they had, because the government did not give the people that knew our water control. They brought in people from Pennsylvania to manage the crisis on a body of water that is different from every other piece of water in the country and probably globally. Perdido Pass is quite different. So, they were doing everything that they could do, which was take their boats out there with that boom and try to stop it. And I just sat there and cried watching them because they should have been the people trying to explain this is what happens. Because when they put the boom in the bay, in the pass, they put rigid boom in there, which that water is very rough and such. It wasn't appropriate for the situation, but no one could tell them anything because they were the experts. So
and you wonder to what extent that was a corporate decision.
It was a federal government decision.
Okay, all right.
So the federal government mandated who of their buddies could come in and take over that.
And it's ludicrous. I mean, coming from Minnesota, it's like having people, from, I don't know, South America or something, trying to figure out what to do about problems on the Great Lakes.
Right.
It's
exactly
not
that.
Their water, it's not their environment, and there are people here much better equipped to tell you even how not to run aground, how not to run your vessel aground out there for openers. And exactly, you do want people that from the area to make those kinds of decisions.
One would think. But it was just ridiculous. And I'm sorry, I got on my soapbox about that. But, but that's a strong case of the government is not always working in your best interest. We have to, as a people, come together. As humanity come together and figure these things out.
Right.
Because, politicians truly know more than the average person walking down the street does. They just found people to give them a lot of money and give them votes. So, that's just kind of the way that goes.
Right.
And, now here we are with things to take care of and nobody in Washington seems to want to.
Yeah, but I think that's the same kind of empowerment we're going to see with medicine. I think more people are likely to say, look, this is my body. I've been living in it for X number of decades. And I think this behavior on my part is what caused the problem we're having right now. Because you know what you've been eating. You know what you've been drinking. And if you read enough about a problem, whatever it might be, I had a colon bleed going on for a while. And I can answer that question better, than a doctor can. Because I'm captaining the ship.
That's a great
if that makes sense.
That's a great description.
I'm not saying that in the end, I'm going to make final decisions about treatment or whatever. But you should especially be be wary of any doctor who's not listening to you.
Yes.
About what behavior preceded said problem. If you get a sore throat every time you eat ice cream, then you need to tell your doctor that.
And back off the ice cream.
There's an issue there, and people, it's the same thing about you were saying about the Gulf waters. They've been fishing there and recreating there and so forth for now hundreds of years. And they know better than someone from somewhere else what to do about things.
Well, That absolutely is, because, and I've been coming under conviction or whatever about this whole, you know what you did to get in this situation, you need to fix it as far as physical things go.
Right, right.
And that's something that I have noticed in the media is this is your body. You know what you're supposed to do to take care of it. We're not going to slam you, but you just need to evaluate if you're taking care of it to the best of your ability. That's coming through in national media, whether it's online reading or in magazines, and that has been in the last 6 weeks that I've been seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's interesting, because they're not giving you all these crash weird things to do. They're saying, what have you been doing that got you here? Pretty cool.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to take our break in about 2.5 minutes. When we come back from this break, we're going to have about 15 minutes left. And
okay.
I have been taking notes of questions that people have had for you.
Okay.
And will you be up for a few more?
Certainly.
And, I am just fascinated because you have tackled some difficult subjects in discussing what you see coming for 2020, and almost everything seems to be on the mark for really being a positive transitional year.
Yes.
I'm very excited by that.
Yeah. And it's desperately needed. We, as a majority, as a country, we, I think we're sensing that a lot of these changes are just desperately needed.
And I think that it's also amazing that you see that people are going to be able to implement those changes. That's just probably the most exciting part that I'm bringing out of this side.
Yes.
Is that the people are going to step up.
Right.
And
yes. And the people are the other side of the government. You know that.
Yes.
I mean, you've got legislative, you've got judicial, you've got the executive branch, those three. But the fourth branch is us.
That's right. And an educated populace is an empowered populace.
Right.
So
exactly.
And I think people have been counting on, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain for way too long.
Exactly.
So it's time to pull that curtain back and take over the Emerald City. And that being said, we are going to go to our break. We'll be gone. And when we come back, I've got these questions written down. And if you have more, get them in here because I would hate to miss them. And we'll see you on the flip side.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine. I am Kat Hobson, your host, with my guest, Janice Carlson, and we have been having the best time. We have been discussing all kinds of things, but primarily her 2020 predictions, which it sounds like this is going to be such a productive and positive year. Janice, I appreciate you sharing that.
You're very welcome.
I think people are kind of like 2019 punch drunk. They're just trying to hang on. And
That's a really good way to put it. It's not just a question of being stuck, having been stuck in 2019 or feeling stuck, but just feeling besieged too. You know, like a lot of what you felt in the last year was not really karmic. It's not really what most of us expected to have happen, because it wasn't particularly karmic for most of us. It was more issues from the outside, like I say, almost like having someone throwing lightning bolts at you from on high. A lot of it is stuff you could not control particularly. All you could do is get out of the way.
Yeah. When your only option is to react, you are not having a good day.
No. Or a good year,
a good experience, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm just glad. I'm just so glad. And I'm also glad that I know how good you are. So that's encouraging.
Well, yeah, part of what puts us in the driver's seat is just having it be an election year. I mean, that by itself says to most people, get out there and vote.
Get out there and
you're the
wisely.
One. You've got to do this thing. You know, it's not a lot to ask of our citizenry that they go out every 4 years and vote. Would you rather be standing in bread lines somewhere? I mean, no.
No. I've seen that. I've seen that movie. That's, Nazi Germany, Russia, Venezuela. Right. Don't want any of those. Those are bad places to be. So
they are.
It's just like, So, especially Venezuela. They were in such great shape. Great shape. But, okay, I have to ask these questions or I'm going to catch it from our listeners.
Okay.
When you have interacted with spirits and stuff, have you ever interacted with aliens, like people not of this zip code, as it were?
Anyone from heaven, that would come under the category of angels and that type of thing would be kind of considered extraterrestrial. I haven't personally, though, had an ET experience that I'm aware of, but I don't discredit that at all. I know too many really credible people that have had interactions with aliens. So my personal answer is no, but that certainly doesn't mean I don't believe in them.
Me too. I feel that way as well. Way too many people that I know and trust. Okay.
Right.
The other is, when you have interacted with spirits, have you ever had fear?
Sometimes they startle me, just like anyone else in the middle of the night having, say, your shredder turned on by somebody or whatever. That stuff startles me. I don't know that it's lasting fear. Once I figure out who it is that's trying to communicate with me and stuff, I'm okay. But and they're not really supposed to scare us. I mean, that's one of the differences between haunting and visitation. Visiting from a loved one is visiting. Haunting is where they're scaring you, and they're trying to scare you, and they're trying to intimidate or manipulate you in some way. And so just being aware of how that spirit makes you feel is very important. I've even been told that they can lose their visitation rights if they scare the living.
Really?
So most spirits are really trying not to scare you. or startle you. But sometimes it happens, and, it's not a good scene when it happens because neither party wants it to happen.
Well, yeah, and as a follow-up on that, from my question, when that does happen, then, it's really detrimental, because then if you're with people that say, oh, well, I could never see a ghost, I would never, deal with that, you kind of have to.
And oftentimes it's not even seeing them. It's other things. For instance, when I talked about someone turning on our shredder in the middle of the night, it was my brother-in-law's brother who had died suddenly of a heart attack. And the guy in life was like a bull in a china shop. He just literally was always someone who came into a room, burst into the room, and told a totally inappropriate joke or did something that was really kind of disruptive and disturbing, but kind of funny later. And I literally had to tell him, you've got to stop doing this. You're scaring the living. You're scaring your brother. You're scaring my sister-in-law. And now you're doing it to me, and I won't have it. I won't have you coming in here in the middle of the night doing this stuff. If you want me to talk to your wife, which I will, and that's what it was about, was that his wife had requested a session with me, and a day had gone by, I'd been busy with things and hadn't gotten back to her, and he was letting me know, you better make good on that promise, which I intended to. Right. But you don't have to come bursting into my living room in the middle of the night and scare the crap out of everybody in the household. And once we had that talk, he never did it to me again, and he never did it to his brother's household again. But sometimes you do have to remind them, this isn't funny, it's scary, But that was his sense of humor.
It's scary, yeah.
Yes, it is. And even his wife said that she wanted, when she did communicate with him, she wanted him to come to her during the day. So I said, well, you'll have to have a set time, a meditation time, so that you encourage him to come during the day and not sort of knocking things off shelves in the middle of the night,
Yeah.
Which he was. And that, again, I don't know if he didn't get the memo when he was up in heaven or what his deal was, but but it just was really bull in a china shop stuff, and as soon as a medium talked to him, I made sure the living could have talked to him too, and put him in his place a little bit about that. Then we're all ears if you want to be civil,
Right. That would be so disconcerting.
Oh, it's very scary, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I hadn't really, considered that. But, I mean, I get surprised too, but it's just...
Not a bad guy, a good soul, but again, that's how he functioned in life. So, it was hard for him in death to understand the protocol, the etiquette of visitation is quite different than haunting.
Yes. Well,
and we're all dealing with Hollywood's interpretation of hauntings too, which are sensationalistic and meant to, they take a true story, but then they have to beef it up for the studios and so forth to make it scary for the audience and that kind of thing. And then so we're all kind of afraid of spirits because of that.
Yes.
And yet, with your loved ones, you really don't have a need to be.
Well, that's true. And usually I think people know that. They just get so taken aback that something's there at all.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yes.
And then, have you ever been asked to participate in any paranormal investigations so you could help with seeing spirits and knowing why they're there?
I have worked with one paranormal group from Janesville, Wisconsin, and they were wonderful, very ethical, very great at what they did. Yeah, I did work with them to kind of combine mediumship with the instruments that they were using as well. They would sense something with their instruments, and then I'd come in and see if I could bring through messages for them. I'm not overall... Yeah, I'm not a ghost hunter per se. I do my mediumship as a form of grief grief assuasion.
Right.
And grief counselors and psychologists and stuff will refer people to me for a session to kind of help them. I also do like a money-back guarantee of contact with my medium work, which most mediums don't offer.
Yes, you're the only person I've ever heard of that did that.
Yeah. I really believe in that because I might not be the right reader for you. You know, there may be the number of reasons why we're not getting your loved one to come through. And so I will end the session after a few minutes if we're not getting correct identifying information about that person. But, there are different kinds of mediumship, and there are people who go and exercise various spaces and clean them out and haunted spaces. There are some that work with the police to help find dead bodies and find out what happened in a crime. And my area is more about grief, working with people that are in grief, because that's how it started for me, by losing two parents.
Right.
Yeah.
And now, this is the big one. I saved this for almost last. There's one after that, and it's mainly a yes or no. But, so, Nostradamus, yay or nay? Is he a true psychic? And can you understand his interpretations?
He was doing it remotely, and perhaps there's a modicum of time travel involved with Nostradamus as well, with his meditations. Reading more about time travel now, I'm so intrigued by the fact that it's possible to even go back in time and maybe correct some situations in your own past to make your present better. I think that we do kind of slide like a slide rule in our own time, in our own lifetimes. And so I think Nostradamus was in part a remote viewer and in part maybe a little bit of a time traveler, too. But I think most of what he said was quite accurate, yeah, if you interpret it correctly.
Have you been successful in recognizing interpretations of his work?
Yes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Do you think people should pay more attention to what he has to say?
Yes.
As opposed to retrospectively?
Well, I mean, it doesn't hurt to read his quatrains and to learn about him, because he was a healer as well. I mean, there were other talents that he brought to prophecy, to being prophetic.
I just think that I'm always fascinated by him, because I find that if you go back retrospectively, you can always fit situations to his quatrains.
Yes.
And I have his quatrains, and I try to read them, and sometimes it's very difficult because of the different methodologies of speech now versus then. But I love his work, and I love him.
Yes.
I love learning about him. But that was actually a fantastic question, so thank you, Sherry.
Yeah.
And her last question, and we've only got a couple of minutes, but was, do you carry protection of any type, or are you protected by default?
Well, mediums do have quite a bit of protection just naturally from their guardian angels and relatives who have passed and so forth. But I always clean and seal my aura before I visit what is considered a haunted area. Like you, I'd like, one of the places I've visited a few times is Gettysburg, and so my interest in history is usually connected with any kind of ghost encounters that I have. And I will clean and seal my aura before I go to those kinds of settings, because there's just so much traffic in that setting, in the spirit part of that setting, and I wouldn't want to bring home anything that's going to end up being a real pain to get rid of,
And they can be.
Yes, they can.
I was surprised by that, because I did not realize just what all was involved in making them go away.
especially if you're quite an empathetic person, if you're an empath kind of naturally, and many of us are, and we don't know it. You can go into those situations and they can start channeling through you. And suddenly their problems from that time are your problems now. Yes. And the people around you are wondering why you're acting so oddly and, what your problem is. And so you have to be careful that you don't get, someone who's kind of a castaway, a stowaway. Mm-hmm. I mean to say stowaway in your psyche, because channeling happens.
Inadvertently sometimes. You're right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, we are out of time. I have had so much fun with you.
So have I. I've just had a great time talking to you. You're fascinating and very well read in the field, which is what people need from a host,
Oh, thank you. I just love what I do.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate to have found something that I enjoy greatly. So I get to talk to people like you. So
well, yeah, I mean, in all sorts of different fields, and that's just fascinating. This is really one of the great frontiers. Yes. Metaphysical stuff and paranormal stuff, time travel, all of it. Quantum physics. This is the great new frontier, I think. Yes. And so I can't imagine doing anything else.
Exactly. So I am just very fortunate. And so thank you. Thank you so much for your time and for being here.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure.
And I am just going to let people know that even though we're done for tonight, we'll be back. Denise Pridemore is going to be bringing you a fantastic show tomorrow night on the Paranormal Pride. I have a guest, Michelle Lebaron. You may have heard of her, the Ghost Magnet. She is a lone wolf who has the best time investigating the paranormal of just about anybody. I'm not real sure it's legal. Who knows? But anyway, she'll be joining me on Paranormal Experienced Wednesday. Friday from 5 till 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I am going to be joined by a host of people, not really a host, but a lot of people who, like myself, are missing our host of Universal Universe, Kevin Allen, and we are going to be having a show. I was unable to reach again. Janice, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good night, y'all.